and introduce you guys, and then we'll rock and roll. So we'll see how it goes. I might get Facebook up. Okay. All right. I'll introduce us. There we go. Okay. So, let me where the chat is. Okay, let's get going tonight. This should be a gallery. There we go. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. This is our second to last film discussion in our series on race justice in the church. That Reaching Our City and and Rock Church of the Nazarene have been co-hosting together. This is our seventh of 8 weeks, and so we're really excited to talk about tonight's movie because it's a dramatic representation of things that happen probably on a daily basis across the country, and we've seen protest about that specifically this summer, and I think it brings a real genuine perspective, heartfelt, heart wrenching perspective on this kind of conversation, and I think it's a good way for us to examine the way we look at our own lives and the way that we look at our own interactions and what we can do to make this place, this world, the society we live in, a more just place and a more compassionate and merciful place. So I'm very thankful for that opportunity. Tonight, we're going to be led in conversation by Pastor Braden Hunt, who is also our food pantry manager at Rock Inc. And we are joined by our program director at Rock Inc., Miss Cassandra Fowler. So, you guys, thank you for tonight. And as we get started and people start to join us online and people who are watching this later, hearing you guys model conversation is really important. These are the kind of conversations we hope people are having in small groups with their family members, with their friends, and really learning from one another, the diversity of learning together from different perspectives, why we're doing this. Um, as you guys think about this, and I'll drop my camera off here in a second, as you think about this movie, first, the reason why we're doing movies or films is because they give us a kind of emotional impact in ways that books don't. We can vicariously participate in these people's lives because they're like people that we've grown up around, situations that we've lived through ourselves. So it's easier for us to imagine this happening and to emotionally feel the weight of it. So that has always been our first question. It's been the experience question. How have you experienced this movie? What immediately is your emotional reaction to it? What did you feel when you watched this movie? And then I'll jump out and jump back in as needed. Why don't you guys talk about that together?
Um, for me, it's just I hate to keep saying this, but it's kind of everyday life. It's almost a expectation, and
Mhm.
if it doesn't happen, it's it's a surprise, and it shouldn't be an expectation. It should be a surprise, But unfortunately, it's not, and you're dealing with young people who haven't really experienced life and they want to know why. He asked, why did you stop me? And he legally can ask that.
Mhm.
But then it became a problem because he asked. It's like the law officer didn't even know the law. you know. And so while she pleaded with just keep your hands on the dash, he just wanted to know why he was stopped. I think that's pretty simple. It's not hard. So it just it infuriates me. But you know, I just try to tell young people this is life for you. And at the end of the day, I just want you to get home alive.
Hmm.
Braden, talk about that. You're a youth pastor. You work with a lot of kids like this. Why would this young man have that reaction? Um, when he's doing something legally right, the young girl knows there's danger there. But what do you think is going on in a kid like that?
Well, I think just in my own experience working with youth, I've had the privilege, I would say, of being able to see that awareness grow in real time, just about different things that are going on, um, and and looking at my own life growing up and my awareness of these issues and I remember in college we had an assignment that was we had to write about when we first became aware of race in a real way. And for me that wasn't until I was in middle school. But for my black classmates that was like I was 3, I was 4, I was very young. So I think generally that awareness starts at a younger age, but I've seen in real time just this awareness of, oh, okay, things are really different for me, and I'm awakening to that reality, and and a lot of times it's accompanied with just very visceral anger and grief sometimes. But I've more often I've seen, at least in my experience, is just this visceral anger that okay, this is how the world is, and I'm mad about it because it is fundamentally unjust that the world is this way. I remember, and for me, watching this film and then watching students go through this gauntlet of emotions, and really where this happened for us, as a group was at teen camp last summer, where we began processing on things that had happened in the past, and it was like it clicked for a lot of our students as like that should not have happened to me. That should not have happened to my family. That should not have happened to my mom or my dad or whoever. Um, and so and that's when I think the grief really came in, was just being able to sit back and process that experience or those experiences that shaped our students in profound ways, but they hadn't had the time to process on or really think about why this happened, and what the ramifications were were for them, in their own development, in their own worldview. But I remember taking a couple students home one time, and they wanted me. They lived on 10th Street. They wanted me to drop them off at a house kind of off of Rockwell and 16th area. And as we were taking them home, and they said, "Well, we'll just walk back. It's a nice night." And first of all, as a youth pastor, I wasn't going to do that. Just so if anybody's watching and thinking that I would do something like that and just let a student walk home when I had knowledge that they were going to walk, a mile or so, I'm not going to do that. But what really made me, even before that thought process came in, we were in that, turning lane going about to go north on Rockwell, and we saw about 3 or 4 police cars, had these people pulled over. And my initial, and they were saying that right when we saw those police cars, and my initial response was, "There's no way I'm letting you guys walk home when they're out here like this. Just no way."
Right. And normally I would, you see a bunch of police cars and you see black kids or whatever pulled over. Normally, I would drive by probably slower than usual, but lately I've been actually pulling over,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so, and not just me, but several people are now just pulling over just to
Yep.
see where it goes.
Then make sure people are okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
make sure people that, that everybody around is aware that there are people watching.
Yeah.
It's great that
I don't know. Huh?
we have the cell phone camera now, and I think probably in the last 2 years I've seen, and this is just a lot of white people stop and film things.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
you used to see a lot of black people do that, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
man, I see a lot more white people saying I better stop and not just ignore this because
Mm-hmm.
they're aware of something. Good points.
Right. And you don't, and I think I always have to choose my words so carefully, but I don't know what you can do. I know there's the media and there's films and there's documentaries and there are all of this stuff, but where does your heart go when you know that it's just fundamentally wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad when we watch um videos like this and movies like this, and I can tell you, when we watch things and when there's police chases and things happening on television, we say to ourselves in the black community, if if he were black, he would have already been shot. You know, where you see people, whites, shooting at the police, and somehow they figure out how to take them down without killing them,
Mm-hmm.
but then we get killed. On one of the where the young lady was talking about how she goes through those different stages depending on where she is, like in her school. We just had the young lady that works with us at the Rock. She and I did a mock interview, and she said, Miss Cassandra, I want to be able to say words like they do. I want to be able to act like they do. And I was like, I knew who they were, but I wanted her to tell me who they were. And they were white people.
Mm-hmm.
And as a black young lady, that should not be her goal. And so she said some different words. And I said, well, the words you're using, those are proper English words. And so she and I went through there are different behaviors that people do, all people, when they're in certain situations. And I said, when you are in your hood, you're going to be a little more relaxed. You're going to have a different mindset, a different language than you are when, say, you're at work. Because then you got to have a different tone to your voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I said, that's just the nature of life. That's just what you do. All people. But you should not aspire to be like white people. like they set the standard. And that's what the effects of TV and the media, and where a lot of people get their perspective of how people are, how they start to group people.
Hmm.
And it's that way on both sides. I get that part, but I feel like it's more on the white side than it is on the black side. We just have an expectation of this is what they're going to believe no matter what. And that's why you saw when he was talking to his family, they had their 1 year old at the table. Now, who sits down with their 1 year old and discusses how to act, you know, to live? And unfortunately, that's how a lot of Black and poor households do.
Hmm. That's what struck me early on. I've watched this film a few times and have come away with different things that I've focused on or really picked up on more profoundly every time. And this one was that well, the fact that, thinking about my own upbringing, I never had a conversation with my parents about how to interact with the police. Um, and when I was in college, I had friends that were like, I keep my license, my title, my registration, all my previous registrations, all my previous years of insurance, and my current year all together in one, so that when I get pulled over, I just hand that to them. And I was like, well, when I get pulled over, I'm looking for my wallet. I'm like reaching over in the glove box and trying to, I'm not at all in fear of something happening to me other than getting a ticket if I'm speeding. But that's just kind of on me. But I never like have had that conversation and have never had to have that in the back of my mind when I have those interactions that, oh, I need to be extra careful, watch my movements, because for the most part, my movements don't matter. If I get a ticket, I get a ticket, but I'm gonna go on my way. And so that was one thing that struck me. And then the other thing that struck me was what you were talking about. And I think it came up in the novel that inspired this movie. Um, is this idea that W.E.B. Du Bois came up with of double consciousness? This idea that for for the main character, for Star, in the world that she lived in her neighborhood, she acted a certain way, and then when she went to the white private school, she had to act another way in order to be accepted. And so I think when you talk about this young lady who's saying, I want to know how to talk like them or talk how they do, there's kind of an understanding of that idea of double consciousness, that this is like, in order for me to navigate a white dominated space, I have to understand how to communicate and thrive in that white dominated space. And my mind went to just thinking about the main character in the movie Star, and then just take an average student from the private school that she was going to.
Mhm,
For
mhm,
Star, in order to be successful in a general sense, she has to know how to navigate well both the world that she grows up in and the world that she's transplanted to in this school. So
mhm,
she has to learn how to navigate white dominated spaces and black dominated spaces. But for the average student in that school, they'll only ever have to know how to navigate a white dominated spaces. They don't need to know how to navigate a or a black dominated space, because they're never going to need um, to rely on that ability to get anywhere in life.
You
Be-
know, a real, just a real example of, um, this wasn't in the movie, but my nephew is running for the mayor in Tulsa. And one of the questions that he was asked was, are you just running for mayor of North Tulsa, which
hmm,
is the predominantly minority community? And he went on to explain he's doing east, west, south. And if any of you all know Tulsa, south side is predominantly higher income and that kind of thing. And so one of the things that I thought was interesting that he said was, we've had lots of good mayors in Tulsa, but is that a question that any of the white candidates have ever been asked? Are you just running for your neighborhood? Are you running for all of Tulsa? You know, that right there is a clear understanding of where their minds set are, which is the same thing. He went on to explain, you've assumed because of my race, he said, you don't know that I went to an international school. You don't know that I went to a Catholic school. You don't know that I'm bilingual. You don't know that I formed these different partnerships, that I've run 2 campaigns for major candidates. There's just an assumption of these things. And instead of, like the film, instead of people recognizing that this is a problem, they want to act like it's not. And that, like, what's your problem? You get to live here, you get to work here, and if something bad is happening to you, it's always your fault when it's clearly not your fault. And that's what's hard to navigate, is, as in this movie, is it's not her fault that she was a witness to an unjust, but as she's being questioned, it's like it is her fault. Like what was he doing to deserve this? And I think people don't look into their own closets and figure out some things that they have done, that something should have been done to them about it, but it didn't happen because of the color of their skin.
hmm.
And if they dig deep in their heart, not saying, because just like any race, if you are wrong, then there are consequences for doing the wrong thing. And that should be just across the board. But it says the same thing. If you're doing the right thing, it should be across the board. It shouldn't be mixed up. And this film showed clearly how it can be mixed up.
And I think it shows how, and I've noticed this participating in protests as well. This you see in the film the white students at the school using a Black Lives Matter protest as a way to get out of taking a test, as a way of getting out of schoolwork. In a similar way, I have witnessed, unfortunately, a lot of white people at protests filming themselves doing chants and doing this, that, and the other so that they can post it on social media, or taking pictures so they can post it on social media so that they can get some sort of clout off of what for Black people is a real struggle for liberation, but for a lot of like the students in the film, and for a lot of people that I've seen, definitely not all, for sure not all. I want to say that, but this just using it as a stepping stool for more followers or for my convenience or for whatever it is. And you can see later in the film especially that her one friend didn't really mean it when she did it. In fact, she was kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, but she was using, I mean, she just went with the flow because that was what was going to get her out of doing, that was what was going to be convenient for her at the time. And I think, um, and I like your both ends of the spectrum there, where if you're wrong, there should be consequences, and if you're right, it's right no matter who says it or who does it. I know that's a Malcolm X quote. He's like, I don't care who's speaking the truth. I don't care if you're black or white as long as you're speaking the truth, is essentially what he said. And I think that carries with it something fundamental to just struggling against injustice and being introspective and being able to be honest with ourselves about things that we've done or attitudes that we've had that should have ended up for us being, ending in some sort of consequence. I know a lot of old Nazarenes who went to SNU who did some stuff that was very illegal and would have got them sent to jail for a long time had they been black. Now, I'm not going to out them, but they were just having good fun as college students, not saying they were doing things maliciously, but it was against the law and they would have gotten a lot of trouble had they not been white. Let's just be honest, especially in the 60s and 70s. And so even thinking back on those experiences where I've been able to do things or to say things or to be places that my black friends or black coworkers, black classmates would not have been able to do, or where they would not have been able to be. That's very important in building, because I think at a fundamental level, it's about having some level of empathy and some recognition that at the core of this is fundamental injustice, fundamental unfairness. And then once you get to that, then you can build off of that and say, okay, how do I participate in moving toward justice? But if you never get there, if you just kind of scapegoat the issue or say, well, in this case, the hairbrush looked like a gun, or in so many other cases, well, George Floyd shouldn't have been trying to use counterfeit money, or Eric Garner shouldn't have been selling illegal cigarettes, or Trayvon Martin should have been walking through that community. Whatever it is that we try to excuse and use somebody's past as a way to justify their death, if we can't even get past that, then we can't really see where it is that we have failed our fellow siblings in the human race to come to their aid for justice, and not putting ourselves on the line to do that, no matter where we've come from and what we've experienced. So I think that the film speaks to that in a way, and I like how you pointed out again, just it should be across the board, and it shouldn't be that we have young people in our community who are saying, well, I have to learn how to act white to succeed. Unfortunately, in a very simplistic way, that may be true in some sense, but that doesn't mean it should be true. Just because it is reality doesn't mean it should be reality.
Right, but your community has a responsibility to help build your character when you don't have an intact family, and that includes, you know, your church, your neighbors, because when your neighbor sees your child doing wrong and says something to your child, you need to be okay with that. And when you see these kids uh, stealing and looting and doing all of that, it's not okay. It's not okay, whoever's doing it. But it's up to the community to step up and step in. But when they do step up and step in, it's your responsibility to give them leeway and give them what they need, the services that they need to help with their children, with their character building, with their education. And sometimes it takes moving if you can't do it right there. But some people don't have the privilege of moving. And like in the film, she was driving her children across town to school so that her husband could stay in an area that he felt comfortable. But she needed her children to have a different exposure. Nobody wants drug dealers on the corner. No community that I know of wants prostitutes on their corner. But if they're there, you get to even treat them with dignity. And so, you know, throughout the film, they did show how to treat people no matter what they did with dignity, no matter how mean they got, like in the church when that lady was hollering for her son who didn't even want to be with them. And that the father said he doesn't want to go back there. And the mother was like, but she in the church yelling. Well, if you don't want to turn the church out, you need to get up and go back there with your mother. Because I guarantee you, in the Black church, it would have been turned up and turned out. You know, that's just the way it is. You know, and things that start out like they were at a party. And that's what you see on television. Chicago, it starts out as a party, and then some nut interrupts the party with a gunshot, and innocent people have to flee. And now that gets to be headlines.
And everybody at that party is guilty by association.
Right.
And that whole community is guilty by association.
Right. You know, so it's like we do stuff like we're just like out there where other communities are like they're sneaking down there to buy the drugs. But yet our community is full of drugs. You know, they're sneaking down there after hours to get the alcohol. But yet the portrayal is our community is full of drug addicts and alcoholics. You know, you see the homelessness is out there in our community. And when we walk by them, we speak to them because it's like, you may be homeless, you may be laying on the sidewalk, but we're not going to kick you, spit on you. We're going to probably try to figure out how we can help you if we can, because chances are great we know generationally who you belong to. And that's hard to say in most communities, that you can point out generationally who belongs to who, unless you're in a very small town.
Yeah. And
And
that
that's why there's a comfort level.
and that's one of the, I think one of the larger themes in the film is just this idea of your community and your loyalty to your community. Um, and I've heard it said, I'm not sure who said it, but when I heard it said, I was really struck by it, and it stuck with me since I've heard it. But I've heard somebody say before, Black people have a very strong sense of where they're from,
Mm-hmm.
and by that he meant, like, if you're from, if you're from East Side Oklahoma City, you're gonna rep East Side Oklahoma City your whole life. If you're from 10th Street, even if it's relatively new, if you've grown up along 10th Street, you're going to say you're from 10th Street your whole life. And that's going to be the place that you love the most and the place that you care about the most. And I like how you talk about, um, just this sense that of offering compassion and recognizing the dignity of people, even if they find themselves in a lowly situation. And it reminds me of, I saw an interaction on social media between a pastor who has a lot of followers and, just one of his former followers who stopped following him after this interaction because they were upset that this pastor apparently had some porn stars following him on Twitter or whatever it was. And they were like, well, why don't you block them? Why do you let them follow you? He's like, Jesus had sex workers follow him all around, and he didn't block them. He didn't tell them to leave. He didn't by any means, um, say their behavior was okay or that it was good.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't reject them because he recognized the dignity in them that they had instilled in them by God, and the idea that these people in his time and many times in our own time, um, do so because
Oh, your volume is gone. Did you cut out?
Yeah, you cut out.
I think
I don't know what
Brayton
happened.
cut out.
I think
Yeah, it sounds like like you're 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 back.
Are you there?
While you're getting Brayton back, I
Yes.
was just wanting to know, from people that are listening or may listen later, what would it hurt? I mean, what would it do to you to have a different sense of what you feel about people of color and their and the plight? What would it what would what harm would it do to recognize that there's a problem? What harm would it do to you? Would it make you less than, bring you to a lower level? I guess I'm just trying to understand why we have to have movies like this.
No, my gut is has always been, whether it's this issue or anything else, and if Braden's working again, we'll let him jump in on that too. When when you have to face something honestly, then you have to be responsible for it. You can't plead ignorance. Remember, ignorance is bliss. And if you stop and look, like this is the Inner Roadies brought this up a number of times. It's the seminal story, I think, for this in the New Testament. If you stop and look at the man beaten and broken on the road, you're going to have to do something about it.
mhm.
And at the end of the day, everybody walks by, but the Samaritan, who's not supposed to be a good person at all, according to the Jewish community at that time, because they're half breeds.
Mhm.
they would be in our understanding like the parable. Really, from a modern perspective, it would really be called the parable of the good Muslim. You know, it's the half Jewish person who everybody thinks isn't going to heaven or something like that, and or isn't part of God's faithful people or anything. And Jesus, you know, the lawyer comes, he wants to be what? Justified. And Jesus tells a story and he says, "Well, who showed mercy?" And it's the person who did something. I think it's just a lot easier to lead safe, comfortable lives and pretend like this stuff doesn't exist. And I think people worry about how far will it go. And I think that there are some people that you think all of a sudden you turn around and I mean they get we tend to go to worst case scenario or most extreme scenarios in our head because we're afraid of the unknown. So we're like, oh, so that means all of a sudden everyone's going to have $1 million of reparations. You're like, we're not even talking about reparations. We're saying just get to know a black person, you know, like at least start somewhere. But I think people are governed more by fear and don't want to be responsible. So let's just not deal with it. And if we don't deal with it, that I don't have to say, um, you know, that I need to do anything. And then at the end of that, you know, Jesus comes along in Matthew and says, "Hey, when people say, 'Oh, Lord, Lord,' you know, it's the Christian perspective, and Jesus says, I don't even know who you are. You didn't stop and give me a cup of cold water. You didn't visit me when I was in prison. You didn't take responsibility. Depart from me." I think the rude awakening comes on the back end, one way or another, whether it's judgment in some sense eschatologically, or in this life, you can ignore something for so long and then it explodes. And you find yourself like really trying to catch up, which I think a lot of people are now. So that's my take. I think it's just easier, Cassandra, to when you're in a position of power and wealth or privilege, it's just easier to just go, it's not really a problem. And if you say, hey, come look, come talk about it. No, I don't want to because you know, something, I think deep down, you know, you're going to find something that you just can't easily dismiss. So, Braden, what do you think?
I think piggybacking off of that a little bit, if I'm back now, I think I'm back. Is like Jason said, ignorance is bliss, but willful ignorance is guilt. And so people don't want to look at what they don't want to, because there is that level of, well, if I acknowledge this as a reality, then I have to do something about it. And then I think the other piece of that is if you ignore it for such a long time, or at least only give small concessions where you're saying, okay, I don't believe in this larger narrative that you're trying to tell me about how the world works, but I'll give you this one small thing about, well, yeah, George Floyd shouldn't have died, or whatever the case may be, or it's wrong that people went to jail for longer for crack than they did than for cocaine. I'll just give you that one small concession, but the rest of it, I don't really want to have anything to do with. I don't want to deal with the larger economic structure. I don't want to deal with the larger educational issues or criminal justice reform or the fact that 1 in 3 black men stand a likelihood of going to state or federal prison in their lifetime. I don't want to deal with all that, but I'll give you this one small thing. And then when you get to a point where you realize, oh wait, maybe I've stood on something that wasn't true for this long, then you have to turn and look at everything else you've thought about and done beforehand. And it can be really overwhelming for some people. I would think. And I know even for me at a, young age, 18, 19 years old in college, starting to awaken to these things. And then just, like laying in my bed saying, oh, shoot, I said that 5 years ago, or, oh, shoot, I thought that a couple years ago, or I was, I had this opinion about this thing, or, just feeling at moments in my life, overwhelming amounts of guilt and having to deal with that and be honest about that and process through it.
That's
So
what
I think
Sharon just picked, and just the spiritual side. You said guilt. if we come to see there is a problem, we might have to admit we're part of it. And
Mhm.
we've already talked before about how confession and guilt can feel overwhelming and scary to people, even though the Bible says God provides for that, right? A cleansing for your guilt and renewal and honesty and new life through confession, but we're still afraid of it. So I thought Sharon's point was really good in the
Mhm.
chat. Sorry
Mhm.
to interrupt. You just
So are
you
you,
guilt. So
so, so would it be easier if you take it in like segments? Like, okay, I'm gonna try and do this little part and not taking it all together, but just
Right.
this little part and work on that part. And then I can gradually go to the next part. And then I've got those two, and then I go to the next part instead of just trying to take it all in at one time. Because
I
you can't make up for 400 years
right.
overnight. But I think just the idea that recognizing that what's fundamentally wrong. I mean, that right there. Not that I'm asking you to fix it right in one day, but just the recognition that I don't have to go back and say, oh, I agree with that. But if they hadn't been, because once you put the but in there, you've wiped out the other part.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so that's what I want to know is what is so hard about that?
I from personal experience, once you actually start doing it, I don't know if there's actually that much that is that hard about it. What it comes down to, I think, is just listening to and trusting the experience of Black people and other people of color around you. That's what it boils down to. And let me put a caveat here, not just seeking out those Black people and other people of color who already agree with your perspective. Because I think that happens a lot. Well, we hear about this issue, and we see that across the board there's a whole lot of Black folks echoing the sentiment, and then we go find the one or two Black people who are pushing back against that and saying this is not my experience, and then we just latch onto that and say, okay, this is what I'm going to listen to because this person validates my worldview. And because this person validates my worldview, now I'm justified as, in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now I feel that justification because another Samaritan, came by and said, "Oh no, you don't have to help that guy." That's basically quintessentially what we're doing when we do that. It is just inserting another character in the story. Like say the robber was also Samaritan and he came back. He's like, no, you don't have to help that guy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's
And
kind of like in the story where they were coming together, and one of the cousin is a police officer or something.
mm-hmm,
Yes, and the guy was not even trusting his cousin, you know, to be able to help with the process because he knew he was black like him,
and he knew
you
how the
know,
system was going to
and
work.
and he knew how the system had worked, so he wasn't even giving the system a chance to screw up again, especially when it came to his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to get what they call an OG, an old OG, to come up to the new system that, there are some changes. They're just not quick enough. for you to, especially when it becomes so personal to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of like the right person has to die before the right action is taken. Otherwise, it's no big deal. There's just another one gone, another one bites the dust, you know, whatever.
Yeah, that becomes. I think in thinking about my own experience and those around me, it because what can happen is if I'm struggling with an idea or a truth or something that I've recently taken in that has, and me being who I am, if somebody challenged me on something, my initial reaction, if they really came after me and challenged me, my initial reaction is just a defensive posture and to get angry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think sometimes what happens is people are confronted with these truths or confronted with these ideas, and then they retreat back into an echo chamber of other people that they already know think like them. Maybe they grew up with them or they're their friends, and then they just spiral backwards. They're like, this person said this to me, and then they just spiral that all the way backwards, and then
Mm-hmm.
they end up further away from knowing the truth, as it were, than they were before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that speaks to there's an idea. Don't know who coined the idea. I probably should, but it's called the hermeneutical privilege of the oppressed, which is just this idea that when people go through things, when people grow up in an environment where these are constant realities, the reality of, having to see family members dead or incarcerated before they should be going, or having to see poverty at a high rate, or whatever it is, in communities like we're in, like the Rock is in right here. When you live through that, there, because of your experience, you have a clearer picture of how the world works, and by extension, you have a clearer picture of God's character, because you have seen more and experienced more, and know how to navigate, again feeding into double consciousness, know how to navigate a black dominated space or a white dominated space,
Right. And
and
you
not
don't,
just.
you don't necessarily, everybody has had, different experiences. And obviously that um, kind of holds their life. For me, like I said before, my family has always been community activists. But we owned a business. My dad never worked for anybody else. He
Mm,
said the most racism he experienced was when he was in the Navy, because he was born in a black town. His dad owned a business, and white people worked on, loaded his, didn't want to load the lumber. And the white owner said, well, you're not going to have a job if you don't load Mr. Robinson's lumber, because Mr. Robinson's providing you with a job because he needs this lumber. So you don't necessarily, it doesn't have to happen to you specifically, but you have an obligation to help those who it has happened to.
mhm,
And I think that's what the strong point is, especially in the Black community, is that we have a sense of it is your obligation to help those no matter what their circumstances are. And you might not like their brother, you might not like their mama, but you might like an uncle, a cousin, because everybody gonna be your cousin. And I tell people, don't call yourself my cousin, because I got enough cousins that are really my cousins, you know. But we have that sense of that's my uncle, that's my grandmother, that's my, so we have all these good things that we contribute, but yet we have this portrayal that we're looters and robbers and we steal all the time. We like prison. We like doing drugs. We're gonna always break the law. It's like we're these ruthless people. And so therefore you can just treat us any kind of way
Mm-hmm.
and get away with it. And then when we act a fool, then you want to know why.
Mm-hmm. And I think
And
playing to that, just the Christian idea of going beyond confession. I mean, first we acknowledge, and then we confess, and then the natural next step is repentance, which is turning the opposite direction. So not only is like, okay, I've lived this way, I've held racist views, I've, viewed black people as less than, or I've held these stereotypes about these other people that have been problematic or racist and non-Christian. And then I'm good. I've confessed it, so I'm good, and I don't have to do anything with those. Well, no, the natural next step for a Christian in any behavior that we recognize as wrong is to turn the other way and to actively act against that thing, whatever it is. And so I think there's also pushback when you communicate the idea it's not just enough to not be racist, you have to be anti-racist. And people take that as you attacking them or you telling them what to do. But it's like, well, no, that's actually rooted in a Christian ideal of repentance. If we're going to say racism is sin, then of course we want to be anti-racist, not just non-racist. We want to be anti-sin, just not sinful. We want to be actively against that thing. And I think that's a difficult idea for people to grasp. It's whether it's because they feel like we're piling on and telling them that it's not just enough that you confess and acknowledge your fault, but now you have to go above and beyond and go back the other way and help in the work to reverse that sin, which is both societal and individual. And so now as an individual, me recognizing that I've lived in that sin, now I got to turn back and not only live as an individual who is actively non-racist, but work in a way that I am partnering with people in order to fight against the societal sin of racism. And I think that's again, it's a difficult thing for people to grab onto and live into, because it's a daunting task. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not just going to disappear tomorrow. And so sometimes people will rather just say, well, it's not real, than to acknowledge that it is real, and we got a ton of work to do that's going to last for generations to come. And just so I think that's part of it. And I also, even in our city, and I just wanted to take a moment and make sure that we talked about this before we closed out. But I have spoken about a little bit in the past about Olane Jefferson, who died in mid-May, and he died before he was booked into the Oklahoma County Jail.
you're out. Can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Braden. I think your mic hit out again.
I think
Uh,
am I back in? Am I
yep,
good?
Yeah.
you're in. You're in.
So so didn't really know who was there, who was responsible for that, but do know a few things, and that is that it's been almost 3 months, and the medical examiner is still not ruled a cause of death or anything like that. Um, have heard from a jailer who witnessed it and was horrified by what he saw and compared it to George Floyd. Um, and had talked to the family who just feels like they are left out to deal with this on their own, and that their family member died and nobody cares, and they can't get any answers from anybody. And so I think that's a very real example in our own city where, it's not the only example that's happened here in recent memory, but it is one very recently where we can look and we can say, okay, we don't know what happened, but if witnesses are to be believed, and if family is to be believed, then what took place here is certainly unjust, and we should certainly be talking about it more and be working on their behalf more um, because his life mattered as much as anybody else's, and that's at the fundamental level, where we recognize the value and dignity of the other without any caveat, without any, well, what was he doing, without any, well, why was he being booked, without any of that. Just the fundamental truth that his life mattered fundamentally because he was a person instilled with dignity that we all share, um, but we so often fail to recognize in the other.
I
Um,
I I have this question that I need answered, or people can answer it on the chat, or they can, I don't know, they can call Jason. But I've always understood that sin is sin. So is racism a bigger sin than prostitution? I mean, does it have to involve, like, does the sin get bigger as it involves more people? I mean, why can't we do better? It's like we compartmentalize how sinful we want to be.
mm-hmm.
We pick which sins are okay with. We're okay
Yep.
with. That's definitely true.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't think that's right. We just do. It's easy to focus on. We usually focus on the sins that don't affect us as much, and we ignore the ones that are much closer to our heart. And so it's human nature. Going back to that story, and Braden brought it up either. The young lawyer comes to Jesus because he wants to show that he's justified already. He's trying to get a good pat on the back that he was a good boy, and Jesus gets right to his heart. And I think, Cassandra, we have to keep on preaching the gospel and saying sin's not the worst thing in the world because there's grace. Like it, look, we're all sinners. It's okay.
Mhm,
Just admit it.
mhm,
Let's move on. All of our sins will
mhm,
be a little bit different and a little bit the same.
mhm.
But ignoring sin never works. And I think you're saying a little bit of that. We should be
Yeah,
able.
I'm just wondering how, if this sin affects so many people, till I'm just wondering, I mean, is this one of the bigger ones? I mean,
Well, I do think that if we talk about the destructiveness of racism, just and how over the years, not only has it just been in within individuals saying, well, I value you less than because you're another race, but but it brings with it um, displacement of people, forced labor of people, murder of people, imprisonment of people unfairly. And so it not only is terrible and insidious on its own, but it encompasses so many other things that I would say yes. And if we're speaking on a broad level, it is one of the greatest sins. Many people have called it the original sin of America. Is just this idea that like it carries with it so much destruction and heartache and generational trauma that yeah, it is. And people, I think, and Jason hit on this too. People pick and choose which sins they want to focus on. I mean, it's a classic example in the church that we want to talk about. You know, people getting drunk, but we want to go and tell somebody about who's getting drunk, right? So we want to decry the sin of drunkenness while committing the sin of gossip and slander at the same time. So we always, I think there's always that in human nature. But yeah, I think that's a big question, and I think it gets at the heart of what it is people struggle with when they think about confronting this within themselves and within other people that they know.
Well, guys, great conversation. I mean, the point isn't to walk into to judgment. The point is, and you're not saying that, but just to remind everyone, everyone's worried about being judged. Jesus is going to judge us one way or another, but the good news is Jesus is the judge, and his point of judging us is not to condemn us, but to lead us into new life. And if we just looked at these opportunities, like Cassandra's saying, what would it hurt? What would it hurt to truly have some black friends to truly look into these issues and see why people are quote unquote making a fuss about it and just enter into it. Don't Not on social media necessarily only, but go into real life relationships with real life people, and as the church, extend dignity. It's a great word, Braden. Extend dignity. Remind the world that every human being is dignified because of their image of it being created in the image of God, and do the hard work of getting to know people, and it'll happen over time. Transformation happens in relationships, and you guys brought that up in a lot of different ways. It's not about changing people's minds and arguing as much. I mean, we let the Holy Spirit change people's minds, but you got to engage relationships, and we got to let people have that. And and I think black people need to hear about what life is like for white people. It's different for all of us, and some of the stories that are all of our stories are different. Let's learn our stories and see where that takes us. I'm confident it'll take us in the right direction on these issues.
Mm-hmm.
So and then the systems that support those. You guys both talked about that, with those structures, the dual natures that people have to deal with, the teaching 1-year olds in the movie, about what you have to do with the police. All that's experience, all that's systemic, and we have to address that too. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. This will be available to share and to talk about more with people, and you guys did a great job. Watch the movie if you haven't. Uh, Watch the movie and watch this video again with people and have a discussion with a small group, and let's all trust that God will take us where He needs us to go if we're not afraid to go there, and let God transform us. Thanks, guys. Have a good night. I'm going to turn off the live stream now on YouTube, and then I'll shut down Zoom for the three of us. Grace and peace, everybody.
Thank you.